the threatening of such a long-term and stable relationship is it's just intolerable. I mean,
Yeah.
This is a Canadian ethos. So the idea that he would put Canadians in a position to actually respond to tariffs with their own versions of that is
Right.
just inhumane. It's anti-Canadian, and I can't tolerate it. But I don't know what to do. So it feels different to me than some of the other things.
You know what the polling is in Greenland regarding joining the U.S.?
Oh.
6% for.
Oh.
There's actually people that are for it.
I mean, again, this is the world, right? There are going to be some people who are like, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah.
They could be Americans that live there.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw there was some author that was on the Daily Show this week, and he was talking about just all the different types of, like, the race to get different types of metals to make all these different chips and everything that's moving forward, and even with the electric cars, and that a lot of these metals are found in Greenland, and I think that's like the real reason why
that is.
he wants to. Yeah. But I was wondering if they're in Canada as well. If like,
well, Canada has
similar
American
is the landscape and...
construction will come to a halt without Canadian steel and without Canadian wood and without Canadian electricity. I mean, without Canadian energy, the U.S. grinds down. So but of course, to many Americans, we're nothing but a place you can take from, not a relationship that you honor.
Yeah.
Coming back to those minerals, I mean, some of the biggest mining companies in the world are Canadian, not U.S. Actually, I don't think any of the U.S. never gets mentioned in any of the largest mining companies. They're Brazilian and they're Canadian and they're Chinese now. And you know, in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, I don't know if you've heard about this, but the rebels have taken over the city of Goma in the Eastern DRC. They're supported by the Rwandans, and the primary motivation in that is, I think, probably still related to this crazy mineral called coltan, which turns out to be essential for every chip that's made.
Okay.
And the deposits in the world are in Australia and the Eastern DRC, I think.
Jeez.
Oh wow, and that's it.
That's crazy.
And what kills me is you've got this incredibly valuable resource in this area that people are mining. And the amazing thing to me is it's actually mined in like incredibly small areas. So at some level, you can make an argument that the ecologic damage isn't that bad. But they're basically doing this without any return for the local people.
Oh, I'm sure.
I believe that. Yeah.
You know, and so it's just, that's the crazy thing. I mean, here's this resource that could be helping out the Eastern DRC in a huge way if it was managed right. And it's a complete free-for-all.
Gosh.
I saw your email to Kirk about that. Do you think it's like a safety concern if you're going over there to the DNC?
Yes.
So that part of, well, I was gonna say that I haven't emailed Kirk again about it. So the quick answer, no, I actually think it's probably not, in the sense that, I mean, the one place I mentioned to him offline was Bwindi, had an event 20 years ago. It's a national park right on the border. And actually when Field Museum people were doing work there, they basically discovered and collected the first specimens of Willard's sooty boo-boo, going way, way back to the beginning of when we started recording stuff. But I think right before they went on that trip, some rebels had crossed the border and actually taken some hostages and killed some people. And that's almost the only thing that goes back 20, 25 years. So I think it's probably okay, but here's the flip side of the world we live in. This capital city of Uganda, Kampala, just had a case of Ebola.
Oh, I read about that this
or
morning.
Marburg.
That's
which
crazy.
one had Marburg and which one had?
Tanzania had Marburg, which is another Ebola type virus.
Oh my gosh.
And so Yeah, I mean,
That's awful.
so what I would say is again, I think you could go to the trip they're doing, which is absolutely incredible in terms of the kinds of things they'll get to see and the places they'll get to go. And I think it's probably perfectly safe.
Okay.
But at the same time, I should share with you, there was a Daily Mail piece on Goma falling to the rebels it was very interesting to me because it was written by a guy who's Sudanese. So he's black. I mean, when you're in these places and you're white, you stick out like a sore thumb. This guy sticks out like a sore thumb because he actually resembles a Tutsi, which is one of the ethnic groups, and it's the ethnic group that was targeted in the Rwandan genocide.
Oh,
and so,
Louise.
but he he just tells the story of the crazy chaos which has been going on there essentially unabated for 30 years now.
Oh my gosh.
Across that region. It's absolutely nuts. And again, the people there, 85 to 90% of them are just trying to get on with their lives.
Live life. Yeah.
Yeah. But you've got the governments coming in and providing these militia groups with guns, and it's absolutely nuts. So when I think about all this stuff about biodiversity, I mean, the crazy thing to me is if we could just stop arming these rebels, we could figure things out. But we're not going to do that in the next 4 years.
Well, on that note,
I know.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to post in Blue Sky about it in a little while once we're finished. But
okay.
I think we should put a link to this company.
Oh, cool.
It's called See the Way I See. And it was a young woman. So this sweatshirt comes from a company that a young woman started making their visible expressions of how she feels or how she felt with mental health struggles and stuff like that. And so she made this clothing company. It's called See the Way I See. And if you look at it, it's extremely high quality stuff. This is an incredibly nice sweatshirt. Soft, thick, very high quality. But it's got a lot of important things that people can say, but that they don't ever say about themselves. And if you look on the sleeve, it says, always be kinder than you feel.
Oh, cool.
And so, and it is a visible reminder to check yourself and maybe look at the world maybe slightly differently. And there's things about being anxious, being tired, all of these things in these really pretty, nice sweatshirts. But I can't tell you the reaction that I get when I wear this outside. I've worn it a few times to the farmer's market, and people have come up to me and asked me about this sweatshirt. So it's like an entree for people to look at the world differently in a very strange way. I just never really thought about it because, I mean, this expresses something I've been criticized for my whole entire academic career. The idea that you can't be empathetic or that I'm too empathetic. And somehow that's a negative. So I decided to take that back. And I might as well just tell everybody that, yeah, this is what I am. So you don't like it? I don't care anymore. And if you don't like it, so what? This makes the world a better place. The idea that people don't have that does not make the world a better place. The fact that you need to not show empathy to be successful is ludicrous. And academia is way too full of that. Way too full, sorry, RJ and John, of middle-aged white men who think that the world is only one way and that it can only fit one shaped of person instead of reflecting.
Who are you calling middle-aged?
Yeah, that's right. Be careful.
John's
there.
older than middle-aged. You're not there yet.
I'm
okay.
older than middle-aged.
No, I think I am too. I'm just kidding.
Your average is middle-aged then. I don't know, but I know I'm being
I
kind of.
am. I've just never heard that. You're
I've
right.
never heard that.
I know I'm
It's
being preachy, but that idea of empathy is what the world needs more of, not less of.
And I'll just add to this, given that we're talking about it, is that I just saw an article about Cochise County in Douglas, Arizona, pointing out that they get enough revenue in Douglas. It's coming across the border, people coming from Mexico to purchase things in the U.S., that it brings in $168 million of revenue a year.
Oh, wow.
To a tiny little town along the border. And,
Wow.
So the economics of this is going to be, we'll be watching.
Mm.
And I guess I mean, the economics, yes, but I think the spiritual nature of these kinds of attacks, it just destroys people. It divides. It doesn't unite. Museums unite, which we're going to talk about today. Museums are places of unity that can show conflict in a way that is outside of the political nature of conflict, that forces people into their, separate silos.
And I guess, so moving kind of into the Feather Thief, that's, the book has some pretty doom and gloom parts of it too. And last week we had so much fun talking with Jason about all of the, his experience fly tying and how that can be a good thing when it's done right. And also talking about the Argus pheasant, and kind of moving chronologically through the book. We're now getting to kind of the part where Edwin actually commits the crime, which is very doom and gloom as well. But I was hoping we could talk just a little bit about some of the actual birds. Because I think that, looking at pictures of all of these, like the alive birds as well, just seeing what they're like, I mean, they're really magnificent. And I feel like Kirk does a great job talking about these in the book, but, based on what we do here on the podcast, I thought it'd be fun to just talk about some of these birds because they really are pretty magnificent.
Yeah, I think a lot of them deserve their kind of own podcast. And I think that's what we should do for the next few weeks once we're done with the book, is just have 5 podcasts on the birds that are, most prominent.
Oh, I love that.
In this book, because I don't think talking about them for 5 seconds or 5 minutes can really do justice to some of these birds. We've already talked about one of them.
The flame bowerbird.
The bowerbird.
I mean, I have to say that when I first read this, one of the things that kind of surprised me was this subset was sort of random and not random. In other words, there are plenty of birds with absolutely unbelievable feathers that these people aren't even thinking about, which I don't want them to think about. But at the same time, I mean, these, as he describes in the book, Edwin Rist went in there and made a plan to go to these specific cases and take these specific birds because they were outlined in what the fly tyers needed to tie these Victorian flies. It's
interesting
incredible.
Because I guess it reflects also the world travel that was just beginning at the time, because these are not all birds from just one place, right? So they're not, these fly tyers aren't just stealing birds with pretty feathers that live in England. And there are a lot of birds with nice feathers that live in England. Okay, maybe not quite as nice as some of these other ones, but so it was reflecting kind of the beginning, but rarity and elitism that travel could bring. So, and this is another reason why museums are so important, especially to someone who grew up like me. I did not grow up flying on a plane anywhere. John did. He went all over the world when he was a kid. I did not. So my only way of going to the world was through books, picture books, of nature or whatever, including, warplanes that my dad had. And I think that museums are like that now, right? You can go into a museum and you can, as best as you can travel. You can travel the world. You can see what's in other parts of the world, get a perspective on how people live in other parts of the world, what kind of biodiversity they had, in a way that you can't from a picture book, actually. You can't do that. And robbing and thieving is just, and so I think these birds are just a reflection of what was happening at that time. the fact that people first laid eyes on a fruit crow, first laid eyes on a quetzal. And if you come in and see them for real, a quetzal's tail is 3 feet long. Think about that.
Wow.
A beautiful green iridescent feathers, 3 feet long. It's spectacular.
Well, and it's just the males that have the super long tails. And so they're, going back to the time of Alfred Russel Wallace and Darwin. I mean, these are birds that look like they do because of sexual selection, which was something that Darwin was communicating with Wallace about as the two of them were writing their books and thinking about. So they definitely hold a place. As Shannon was saying, you've got birds of paradise from New Guinea and that part of the Pacific region. You've got birds from Central America like resplendent quetzals. You've got the red-ruffed fruit crows, which are found throughout South America. The bowerbirds too. And so, these groups that were targeted, as Shannon's saying, were things that caught the attention of the early people going around the world. And so that they definitely were preferentially collecting some of these birds to bring back into collections. But I was also going to bring up that the ones he stole were the scientific specimens. He didn't get the ones that were on display in the public areas of the museum. He went into the collections, and there's a duality there that I think it's really important not to lose sight of with respect to what these specimens are actually used for. And Kirk does a good job of talking about that.
Yeah, he definitely does.
But the one through line through all of this is that the empathy that Kirk has for the people he was trying to help in the wars, the immoral wars that the U.S. was engaging in at the time, and trying to help the people who were helping Americans at that time. That is a through line through...
In Iraq.
Yeah, that's a through line through him, right? And so for me, that's a level of kind of hopefulness that his empathy for people, that's just a fundamental part of who he is. And I don't know him at all, except the things John has said about him and through this book and through the interviews you listen to from him. That's a through line in him that I think is really, that comes through. Because he transferred that to these birds. I mean, the idea that he was so committed to trying to find the ones that weren't accounted for, that kind of care and doggedness is, that's something you all want everybody to have, right? Find it out, and hopefully it's a good thing that you care about something that's good, not something that's evil. But, that's the flip side of what Edwin Riss did, right? To possess them for that kind of purpose versus to want them to come back to be the best things they can to contribute to science in general. The flip side of a human coin.
Yeah, I was amazed at Kirk. Just he's like a detective, the way he it's not like he was talking to only people that had already investigated this and they were relaying facts. Like, he was the one really doing the investigation.
Yeah.
And so it was fascinating him finding all of these different avenues and routes and who he could talk to and finding new doors that were opening. I mean, he's a real journalist. So I thought that was just so much fun to follow his path through all of that. He really, he starts out the whole book with the prologue where he's kind of talking about, what sparked all of this. And then I feel kind of the first chapter, it's more just kind of giving a history briefing on things, and kind of as the book progresses, he really is immersed more and more in the story, and it's fun seeing how personal he took it and how much how passionate he says, like you were saying, Shannon. I thought that was really interesting to see that progression and how much more he's become a part of the story, finding everything out.
It didn't start out being funny, but there are some hilarious aspects of this section of the book. When he describes the bodyguard and, his wife sleeping with jet lag during some of the interview, it becomes really funny. I mean, the idea that someone like us would get get a giant 6 foot something, 200 something pound bodyguard to protect us from this nerdy, skinny young guy who stole bird specimens. It's hilarious. It's like a caper.
Yeah. It's like he all of a sudden had this realization that like he could be in danger. He like finally got what he wanted to talk to Riss. And then it's like the hours leading up to it was just this moment of like, I don't really know anything about him. Who knows what he's capable of. This is someone who
spent time in the Middle East during wars and was trying to help people out who were in danger and vulnerable to attack from their own countries and people. And so, yeah.
I was laughing, Shannon, at that same part when the walkie-talkie, he like kept the walkie-talkie in the room so he could call the bodyguard to come in and save him if he needed to. And then the walkie-talkie was like slowly getting exposed. And he was worried that Edwin could see it. I don't know. He was funny.
But then he just got in a plane and went to Norway.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think by then he started realizing that and he'd kind of seen this all along, that there was this, just as he describes, this incredibly bizarrely passionate group of fish fly tyers that would do anything to get, that were okay with anything to get these feathers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't a huge organized deep state. It was Edwin Riss basically making a decision on his own.
I mean, it's interesting. There's a really interesting book by a professor in New York. His name is Jeff Jarvis, and it was called What Would Google Do? And it wasn't so much written from that perspective, but the book is, I don't know, was it 15 years old now at this point? But something I read that was really important for me, because there's a duality that you feel when you're in these positions, which is to want to control access to museums and museum specimens. And you see this a lot in science. Fossil people are famous for this. And frankly, anthropologists are famous for this too. The idea that you fight all these, thousands of anthropologists fighting over the same 10 specimens. And a lot of museums are very controlling of access to them. And many curators feel that you devalue specimens if you use them. And what Jarvis talks about in this book is there's an inverse relationship between trust and control. And that's a kind of a two-headed coin that even I felt with the field museum's collections. You have to fight against that aspect of wanting to control them or think of them as yours. And the reality is that these belong to the world and that we're caretakers of them. And actually, specimens are more valued. And this book helped me understand that it's that dynamic, that control part of it that you're getting at. And so if you're trying to control them, that means you don't trust other scientists, you don't trust other people to use them. And you think you're the only one who could use them effectively, appropriately, fairly, that you're the holder of the knowledge that they possess, that you can kind of gather it into yourself. And this book helped me turn that around and to more celebrate the idea that they're more valuable the more they're used, that other people's perspectives on the exact same item can be really different and important, and honoring of that individual specimen itself. So I think that's a really important part of kind of the dynamic that this gets at. And that's why museums are so embarrassed to even talk about that, right? Because they think they didn't control the access. And that's something to be shameful of.
I don't know.
I
I think one of the things is we have processes. If people want to use the specimens for something, they can make requests, and we'll review those requests. And one of the things Shannon's referring to, I think we have it online. If you go to the Field Museum's bird site, you'll see a policy about destructive sampling. In other words, we will take feathers off of birds. We will take toe pads of birds. based on proposals that people put to us to do things like study isotopes of feathers for various questions that you can answer with the different kinds of isotopes that people have access to. So there are legitimate scientific questions where you actually might sample a few feathers in ways that can be really informative for the biology of the species. Edwin Risk could have put that proposal in. He would have been turned down. Nobody would have let him borrow feathers that way. But and that's probably why, realizing that, he decided just to break in.
Right. But, we let artists come in we would have let him come into the collections, probably not if he'd have exposed his real intent. But we have lots of different kinds of people. We bring a lot of different kinds of people into the museum and show them the specimens close up. You, Amanda, and RJ were part of a group that came in like that. And if you want to figure out how to make feathers, so maybe you want to figure out how to ethically make feathers for fly tires, you need to look at what the thing looks like up close. You need to understand how colors are made. You need to understand the dynamics of feathers and what they look like up close, or you can't replicate them. Same for bioengineering. You got to look at things up close to understand how it works. This is what we do all the time. This is why we're so driven. It's why I love my job. I get to figure out every day how things work, why they do things like that. It's awesome. It's a really powerful feeling in your mind to know you can do that. And I think it's really important that museums are open to letting people come in, to letting artists view the collections. The only way we're going to get enough understanding of why we have so many and of what we do with them is that we let people see inside, behind the walls, that we're not a cabinet of curiosities. We don't just put them in cases and, put our Victorian hats on and go look at them as if they were ours, like people do with stamps or private art. It's not, these are held in trust for the world and for the future, because they have optimism in them. They have data in them that could help into the future. To learn from the past, understanding in the present, and predicting the future. That's the only way you protect. And the only place you can do that is in museums. The only place. You can't do that anywhere else. Pictures don't do it. People's written histories don't do that, even though those are really important. You can actually see the real object. You can see an object that Wallace touched. Think of that. He took the tags off of birds that Wallace touched, held. That's so immoral.
For me, it's more that Wallace spent an immense amount of time and effort to get to the place where he actually collected them and recorded the information, and they're there. And the idea that could be lost is just heartbreaking. But, one of the things that comes out in the book, which is just breathtakingly scary, and we've talked a little bit about this in the past, is that it was a month before they realized that it had actually happened because of the way we stored these specimens for their own good. We put them in cabinets, and the reason they recognized it was because a curator was asked a question by another researcher, and he went to the cabinet to open it up to look for it, and the specimens weren't there.
I mean, we deliberately don't open the cabinets all the time, right? Every time you open it, you risk an insect getting in. And if you let a moth or something like that get in, they can chew through every specimen in a case in no time flat. And you'll be left with an outline of the birds and the dust of feathers that the bugs have left.
Oh my gosh.
And so every time you open a case, you risk things like that. Every time you open a case, you expose the specimens to light. Light is destructive. Sunlight is destructive to specimens. It fades colors, alters feathers. So, but you need natural light to actually study the things too. So, because, we've already talked about how colors are made, and the fact that light is really an important aspect of how you view color, how you measure color. So we deliberately don't open the cases. We don't wander around with them open to letting people steal things or exposing to insects or light or water or fire or other chemicals or smoke or whatever, or dust. And we don't do that. And we have 600,000 specimens in our collection. Think about what it would cost, how many people you would have to look at every single specimen with any regularity. I mean, I wouldn't mind this, but every person in the museum would have to be a bird person in order to do that,
Right.
which fine by me, okay, but that's not the way museums work. So we just can't do that. It takes years to go through and check each specimen. Years,
Wow.
not just days. So
Are you surprised that it had only been a month that it took them to figure that out, that it couldn't have gone longer?
So I actually think the way I look at that is that I think it's a measure of, I agree with what Shannon's saying, and yet at the same time, a collection like that, which is, again, the largest bird collection in the entire world, is getting questions from all over the world by people working on things, such that people are going in and out of those cases, if not, every week or even every 2 weeks. It's not a terribly long time. And so, I think that's an interesting aspect of the whole thing. Well, it's interesting the way the story goes, right? Because the way Kirk tells it, what they went to first was to look at whether or not Darwin specimens had been stolen. And one of the ironies to me there is there's a bunch of scientists.
Yeah.
They're not clued into the real world, and I'm guilty of this too.
Yeah, not cued into the the fly tie community's goals there. Placing
just
our
because
own value
they're
judgments.
duller feathers that would never really appeal to a fly tire.
Oh my God, there has never been a Galapagos finch in a fly. I guarantee you. Despite what Jason said the other day about wanting some to look gray and some to look like, no, there's never been a.
I was wondering, you were talking about different requests that would come in. Have you guys ever received like a super odd request?
All the time. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Are there any you can think of where you were like, this is so weird? Somebody that wants to see something.
I mean,
you mentioned Yao Ming at one point, I think.
Yeah, he was getting a tour of the museum and he came into the DNA lab. And that is not uncommon to want to see behind the scenes. People just don't know what goes on behind the scenes of a museum, right? They don't know what we have. That such a small percentage of our stuff is actually on display, and they don't know what scientists are actually like. Just like, I might not know what a professional basketball player is actually like very much either. So that's why it's fun getting to meet different kinds of people. And every time people come behind the scenes, they are mesmerized by just what things look like up close, and the fact that people really do study all these specimens. So it's not like we have them just to have them. We have them so that people can study them. And there's an amazing amount of research that happens behind the scenes, and not just done by us, but done by people from all over the world. So these are resources for the whole world. So yeah, we get requests all over the world. John was talking about requests from Antarctica. People putting together a worldwide database of specimens from Antarctica or the Falkland Islands from all over the world. So then that's a resource from which even people who have strange ideas can query. One of the advantages of digital databases is that they can often fill their interest with just a database search. But John,
RJ,
what do you think the weirdest
I was
thing?
I'm trying to think about that, and I mean, one that I talk about was one that actually happened when we were at Louisiana State University, and it was an interesting one because our major professor Bob Zink was curator of the frozen tissue collection, And he came to us one day and he said, "What would you do with this?" And he had gotten a request where they wanted to sample a tissue of every single hummingbird species in the LSU frozen tissue collection, which is one of the largest collections and most diverse, particularly for neotropical birds. So it's a tremendous collection for hummingbirds. And it was a researcher who wanted to look at, what was it, Shannon? It wasn't genome size. It was a basic aspect of cell size, I think. And Bob's quandary with it was that the best use of these tissues for that particular question?
Because they are finite resources, right? So
particularly the tissues. And so he said no. And what I always think about that is he said no, without fully, I mean, that maybe this isn't fair to him because he may have thought about this, but from my perspective, I certainly didn't realize that we'd be able to get genomes of these things now. And that's exactly what's happening. Right. And so if you use those up,
we would look at a request differently now. That's why we ask people for proposals. And we do things that it's a committee that decides. We do things that sometimes we do really pretty reluctantly, but we also want our specimens to be used in those kinds of the ideas that our specimens are at the basis of what could be revolutionary new ideas that people have. I like that, right? That pushing the frontiers, but it can be hard, which is why we ask for proposals. And if someone like Edwin Riss came into our museum, they wouldn't be just left alone in the collections, right? They would be shown specimens with one of us with them.
So here's an example of one that I always found really fascinating, which is that during the period when Ivory-Billed Woodpecker sightings had peaked in the last 20 years or so, we had a group come in and they had been down in Arkansas, I think, and they had found some trees that had bill markings on them. And they had made plaster casts of the area where the bill markings were. And they were literally looking at our ivory-billed specimens compared to our pileated specimens and trying to ask the question are these chisel marks more consistent with a bill of a pileated versus a bill of an ivory-billed? And wow. I don't want to say that this was a scientific thing, and I don't know that they ever published anything on it, but one of the things that was interesting when they were looking at it was that these chisel marks were broader than a pileated bill based on that comparison, and that wasn't inconsistent with it being an ivory-billed mark.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So that it fit better. And so, again,
but
you never know what people are going to...
We would ask people for certain kinds of justification before, and we would do this if we reviewed that paper too. I mean, you would have to show what kinds of variability could be produced by a particular beak, whether it's a ivory-billed or their data. That's why we have so many. Biology is about statistics. So you need to have enough variation that you can understand what a particular form can do into a tree, for example. I have no problems with them looking, right? Because that's where you start. So you look at that, you look at these chisel marks, you look at the beaks, and you say, okay, this is possible. Can we use engineering principles or physical principles to understand the size of a divot that a pileated woodpecker's beak could make into a tree? What kind of tree, first off? Second off, how much variation is there in pileated woodpeckers' beaks themselves, so that you understand the diversity of pecks that could be made, holes that could be made in a tree based on these beaks. You have to have enough to do that. Right? You have to have enough pileated woodpeckers to understand that, or you have no power in the conclusions that you make. Well, some people don't want power, right? Because they don't want the actual data to overturn their preconceived ideas of how the world works, which is fair enough because everybody has preconceived ideas, and the true beauty of science comes when the data actually don't fit your preconceived ideas, and you have to think differently about it, consult different people, and then your mind can get blown. Anyways, requests like that are all even though some of them seem super strange, I used to have a woman who contacted me repeatedly from Rogers Park who kept telling me, and this happened for several years, telling me she had Ramphichelys tanagers, in quotes. She had Ramphichelys in her yard. So these are silver-beaked tanagers. They don't live in North America, or they don't live up here. But she would call every year telling me she had this, which was almost certainly one of the North American summer or scarlet tanagers or something like that. I don't know exactly what it was, but she was pretty convinced. And eventually John and I kept telling her what I thought it was. Eventually John and I drove by her house. We didn't knock on her door or meet her or anything, because what if, right? Not was it likely to be a silverbeak? Well, not likely, but it could have been a really bizarre or interesting variant of something else. Mm-hmm. You don't know. So
well, that's where I say, take a picture.
Well, yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So she never took any pictures?
No, she was clearly very elderly.
Okay.
But if someone takes the time to call or write like that, it's on our way home. No skin off my nose to go take a look at her yard for 10 minutes. Most of these things don't take that much time. And I feel like if people want an answer of a question from a museum, that means they actually recognize that we can't answer their questions, and we should. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't just sit behind our walls. Although calling me is sometimes not a good thing, because I don't even know how to use my new phone. So we got new phones in the museum, and I have to look the directions up every time there's a phone call.
Speaking of getting old.
Yeah.
Well, this reminded me of another thing, which is that if somebody from the birding community writes and has a specific question about ID of birds that they want to look at in the collection, we're happy to try to set up a time where they can come in and look at the collection to see the different plumage types and think about what that tells them about the ID questions that they have. Those are they may not be scientific questions per se, but at the same time, they're one of the reasons why the collections are there.
And anytime you get people behind the scenes, or anytime you can answer a question, it's a person-to-person interaction. And that's not forgotten by either side of that. These are the reasons we have these specimens. The reasons we have expertise is to tell people things. And if we want support of the community, which we do, the public, through federal funding, funds a lot of the research that we do. And we have an obligation to people who are helping fund that research to answer their questions and to tell them why we do what we do, why we have so many, why what we do is important. Because that's the only way they're going to see it, through our eyes. They're not going to see it, in a dream. It doesn't work that way. This is our obligation. I feel really strongly about that. The museum, we have a lot of visitors. Birds and mammals in the museum have hundreds of visitors every year to the collections. And that enables them not just to see the collections, but to interact with people behind the scenes of the collection, so they get to know who you are, what you do, what you care about. And then they can support the museum. They can actually answer questions of other people. Well, why do we care about the museum? Well, I care because of X, Y, and Z, right? So maybe that makes the other person think, okay, well, yeah, I see that. But if they don't see us as people, they don't meet us, they don't understand, they don't meet the specimens up close, to understand that we treat them like a family person, right? Each one of those birds is a unique individual. Just like you're not the same as some other person. That is true of everything that's in our collections, not the same as any other individual at all. So just like you don't tell the story of your whole species, you tell one part of the human story. Every single bird that's in these collections tells one part of the story of their species. And we should honor that. birds shouldn't die without being able to tell their stories. It would be like a picture book where someone was ripping out the pictures of your loved ones from your family album. That's what stealing that was like. Would you be happy if someone took out all the pictures of your parents from your family album or your grandparents? No, you'd be horrified. It would make you furious and sad. And that's what that is like. I mean, he ripped the pages out of the picture books of birds from the British Museum.
And then didn't serve any jail time either.
Right.
Which is another thing that is an infuriating twist on this whole thing.
I don't know, what's an appropriate punishment for that? It's that, I mean, you want people to be punished, but what I want him to feel is the absolute sadness and sorrow and the loss that not just the museum curators, the people who work in the museum, but the rest of the world feels about the loss of those to their potential. How do you make people understand that? And it's pretty clear that community doesn't.
You write a book.
Yeah,
that's what you did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, Kirk really shined a light on that, and I feel like now, I mean, so many people know who Edwin Rist is and the horrible things that he did, and he's never going to be able to shake that, and I think a lot of that is because of Kirk telling that story.
But he doesn't feel that he's a thief.
That's true. Well, I thought another kind of wrinkle in this whole thing is that he really is kind of a doofus. Edwin Rist, like as far
you
as
can't respect him
like
because he seems so stupid.
I mean, like I feel like we watch a lot of true crime stuff these days, and I mean, I know Shannon, you do too. And kind of reading all of this, like him dropping his thing to break the glass, and his like internal debate, like, should I post these online? Oh no, I could get caught. Oh, I'm gonna do it anyway. It's like he's not a very smart criminal either. It's like he kind of tripped over himself.
He wanted a new flute.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
it's not just that though. That is true, but that's not why he took them. He took them because he wanted them. Right?
Yeah.
He wanted to possess them. So yeah, selling a few of them could get him a new flute. Okay, fine, but he wanted them.
I think you're giving him too much credit in that sense, to be honest. He wanted the money that he could get from them.
Maybe, but he wanted the prestige that came from having them and being able to sell them to other people, right? Because that's a measure of his own prominence, right? And you have to have them to have that, right? And so, yeah, they're rare. People want rare things.
There is a tiny bit of credit that goes to the community for actually finally tipping the police off